Kia ora and welcome into another episode of the Kiwi Football Fix. We've got a very special episode for you today. We are joined by All Whites head coach Danny Hay. There is so much to talk to and about with Danny, given that 2021 is looming as a bumper year for international football. I'm talking the Olympics for both the New Zealand men's and women's sides, and obviously World Cup qualification. There's a World Cup at the end of 2022 in Qatar. How do we qualify for that? With all of the answers, hopefully, fingers crossed, we welcome in Danny. Danny Hay, good to see you, mate. Welcome back to the Kiwi Football Fix.
Yeah, good to see you, Goran. Thanks for having me.
OK, so where do we begin? Let's start with World Cup qualifying, because Andrew Pragnell, the CEO of New Zealand Football, said back in January that we were looking at a possibility of a start date in June to begin the qualification process. How are we progressing with that?
Yeah, look, that was 100% the plan. And even when we spoke to the players at the back end of last year, we were quite adamant that, we'd hopefully have COVID sorted and that international travel would be up and running by June. But as we know, things are dragging on and not for the better. We find ourselves in a lockdown now. So it's been really difficult, and obviously New Zealand Football and OFC have been working very closely alongside the government and High Performance Sport New Zealand. And we just know around travel and how difficult that is, and also the MIQ facilities and how early you need to book into that. We were looking to have to bring in 11 teams to try and host World Cup qualifying tournament here. So the way it's worked out is that it's not going to occur in June. It's just far too difficult to bring to life. So that will be pushed back out to the back end of the year, or probably more likely January next year.
So all of a sudden you're looking at the possibility of World Cup qualifying, an international or an intercontinental playoff game, and the World Cup all in the same year. Is that possible? Can you do that feasibly?
Yeah, look, it's going to be difficult, but I think FIFA, along with all the confederations and all the clubs, are going to have to come together and probably look to create an extra couple of windows, or elongate some of the windows next year that will allow us to get through all the necessary qualifying through the intercontinental playoff and then into the World Cup, which, as most of us know, has been pushed back to later in the year, which does give us, I think, a few more opportunities to try and get those games played.
Has New Zealand Football spoken to the government about vaccinations and the like? Obviously, they're being rolled out at the moment as we speak. What about for the All Whites? What about for the other member nations of OFC to get those teams into the country safely?
Yeah, look, I think, every stone is being turned over in the search for answers. And so vaccinations is definitely one of them. And there's lots of talk in the media at the moment around vaccinations and I guess having a vaccine passport to travel. So I guess there's still a lot of water to pass under the bridge in that regard. But hopefully by January, at the latest next year, we'll be able to get this qualifying up and running. For me, it's difficult to sit here in New Zealand and look at other nations around the world, particularly those in Europe that are getting to play regular football fixtures. But I do have to remind myself that we're in a unique position where we're at the bottom of the world. It's not easy for us to travel. All those other nations in Europe that are playing, they've basically got their players on the doorstep, and they're coming from 2 or 3 countries. Whereas if we were to bring our players together, and this is the big difficulty, they're coming from every corner of the planet. We've got players playing down this part of the world. You've got them in South Africa. We've got multiple in the States, and then players scattered throughout Europe. So it genuinely is very, very difficult to bring our side together.
Yeah. The original proposal, Danny, was to get all the players from the different nations to New Zealand. What if we took the All Whites and all the other nations to a different country in the Pacific? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, well, the reality is, in terms of travel, we would still have to probably come through New Zealand. For a lot of those nations, say, even if you looked at somewhere like Fiji, which is probably one of the bigger OFC nations, all the players would have to still come back through New Zealand to then transit onto there. And, we've still got a couple of week quarantine that would be in place. It's very, very difficult. So there's no simple answers. Ultimately, we're probably the best nation to host the World Cup qualifying, just simply because we do have the facilities. We do have the medical nous should anything go wrong. And we do have the hotels that can host these teams. It's just tough at this point in time around the MIQ facilities that they are. They're booked out a long time in advance, as everybody knows. I think every single New Zealander around the world is scrambling to get back here because, compared to lots of places in the world, even though we are in a small lockdown at the moment, we've been living the dream. And everybody wants to get back here, and I don't blame them.
What does this mean for you personally? Because you are employed primarily as the All Whites head coach. And in the last year or so, we've seen fixtures cancelled with England and Belgium. The World Cup qualifying continues to be pushed out. How are you feeling mentally at the moment? Are you drained? Are you coping? Do you need a hug?
Oh, look, I'd be lying if I didn't say I'm not frustrated. Obviously, I want to be working with the players. I want to be on the grass. We want to be playing games. So it's been difficult for me personally, but at the same time, I constantly look and remind myself that we're going through something that is entirely unique, and I'm not the only one that's going to be struggling. And when I really I guess nut it out in my own head, I look at the fact that we've got our players and multiple players and more players than we ever have playing in professional environments around the world, and they're playing regularly. They're all developing. So I know that when we do get through this, which we will, that we're going to be in a good space to really kick on, because I genuinely believe in the group of players that we can bring together and the young players that are starting to emerge. So for me, I've just got to remind myself that in the big scheme, things are looking bright.
And when we do get through the other side, Danny, we're confronted with the possibility of a home All Whites game. If we do this central qualifying thing where all the nations come to New Zealand, a home game for the All Whites. I mean, we haven't seen one of those since 2017. Is that right?
Yeah, I think your guess is probably as good as mine. I can't even remember back that far. It has been a long time. It's quite frightening. So, yeah, that for me, that's a big driver. And I know for the players as well, they would all desperately love to get back here, reconnect with friends and families for one, because as I said, they're scattered all around the world. But the ability to show people how good we can be, I think is a real driver as well. I'd love to play in front of a home crowd. I'd love to play in front of some of our up-and-coming young players, those that want to be future All Whites, and put on a show. Because I think we've got a different brand of player now that is starting to emerge. And I think we can play a different style of football that's probably slightly more attack-minded and creative than probably what people have seen on these shores in the past.
Yeah, I was talking to Joe Bell a few weeks ago, and I asked him, what is going on in New Zealand football at the moment where we've got all these really creative and confident midfielders who can just live on the ball? Joe himself, Sarpreet Singh, Ryan Thomas. Where did they all come from, Danny? Have you got something to do with this?
Oh, look, I think that's a great question, because there's been, I think, over the last 10 years, it was a real change in emphasis in terms of how we viewed the game and how we trained the players. I think the Wellington Phoenix coming to the fore has been hugely beneficial for us. Places like Oli Academy and what Declan Edge has done with that and the players he's developing. And I think it's just the mindset we're taking into developing our players now is definitely improved. Is it the be all and end all at the moment? No, we've still got to continue to look to evolve and improve. And we can't forget that we produced players of world-class quality in certain areas, and we've got to remind ourselves that we need to still try and develop those sort of players, not just creative midfielders, because there's a real fear that we can go down sort of one track and develop a similar type of player. So it's just getting that overall development in place. But I think we're in a really good space at the moment. That's why you're starting to see some of these players emerge.
Yeah, and I'd love to see them on New Zealand shores plying their trade in an all-whites shirt. Let's park the all-whites for just a moment and move on to another massive tournament, a competition, the Olympic Games that's set to go in about 4.5 months' time. We're sending a men's and a women's side, if it all goes ahead. Can you tell us about any of the planning? Have you created squads for both sides? What's going on with this?
Yeah, look, we've been planning like the Olympics are going to go ahead. The communication, all the meetings we've had with the IOC through the NZ Olympic Committee have shown us that they're really bullish that the Olympics are going to go ahead by hook or by crook. So, yeah, we haven't stopped planning. I'm talking to the players on a fairly regular basis. Even though you're saying park the All Whites and the Olympic squad, because the All Whites are so young, are very much one and the same. To be honest, I don't differentiate between the two. There will be obviously a couple of older players that would miss out on the Olympics because, as most people will be aware, we can only take 3 overage players, 3 players that are over at the age of, because it's been pushed back, under 24. So, as you know, we've got, some high-profile players, some players that are doing well. It's the top level of the game. Thinking, the Chris Woods, the Winston Reeds, the Ryan Thomases, the Michael Boxalls, players like this that, we're lucky enough, should they make themselves available. And we do have to remember this is not a FIFA window, so the clubs would have to release them for the Olympics and the players would have to want to go. But they're the type of overage players that could add a huge amount of value to this exciting young group of players.
What are the conversations between New Zealand football and those different clubs been like when you're trying to get access to some of our better talent for the Olympics?
Yeah, and that's a big one. So for me, it's all about building relationships. We've sort of been working hard in the background to try and do that. And if I even look back to, it seems a long time ago, but November 2019, after we played the Republic of Ireland, for me, it was a very measured approach to release Woodsy, Winnie and Ryan back to their clubs and then take the rest of the players onto Lithuania, just so that we were trying to, I guess get a few brownie points with their clubs and try and build some strong relationships with them. So, yeah, look, I'm working with each individual player in terms of those overage ones, trying to keep an open mind about which of those players that will exactly be, but just working with them in terms of how they want us to approach the club and the timing of that, and that's going to be critical.
You mentioned Winston Reid, who's back in the UK playing for Brentford in the division below the Premier League. How good is it to see the all-white skipper back on the field? He had a stint with MLS. He's back in the UK. He seems to be over that long-term knee injury, and he's doing well. Great to see him out on the field again.
Oh, look, I'm buzzing that when he's out there and playing in the championship, and that's, that is a very, very good level of football. You've got world-class players operating in that week in and week out. And the fact that he can now stay in London with his family, and we've got to remember he's got a young family, 2 young kids, his wife, and they did it tough last year. He went over to the States. He went over to Kansas by himself and was essentially there on his own for the best part of 5 or 6 months before they came and joined him for a short stint. So for him to have the opportunity, A, to be back playing, but B, to stay in London with his family, for me, is massive. And if anybody's seen any of the games where he's rolled out recently for Brentford, or even read some of the match reports, he's doing very, very well. And for a guy that hasn't played it at that level for a long time, and obviously we know about all the injuries that he's had, it's just awesome to see. He's such a critical part of what we want to achieve long term, not just 2022, but beyond as well.
Yeah, where do you think he can get back to? Because obviously he was a mainstay in the heart of the West Ham defence for so long. He suffers the injury, he gets on the outer, and they sort of, find ways to replace him, and they're happy with their stock now. Where will he eventually get back to? Do you think he'll manage to force his way back into West Ham, or will he go somewhere else in the Premier League?
Yeah, look, football's difficult. It's hard to say. I've read reports where they're saying there's no way back for him into West Ham. But a couple of key injuries, you just don't know. He might have to get called back from loan. You just don't know. Football is very strange. So to sort of make definitive statements around where he's going to be is difficult. But look, you've got to look at how West Ham are rolling along at the moment. I think, defensively they're looking very strong. I think David Moyes is very happy with the players he's got there. So that may mean that that when he finishes the season with Brentford, and then looks at his options and whether that is moving to a different club, well, that may be the case. But I think just looking at his performances of late, and he's only going to get better, that he's still capable of playing at a very high level and brings a huge amount of experience and know-how and organisation to a team and to those around him.
Staying in the All Whites defensive line, Danny, if you don't mind, but Libby Cacace is impressing everybody in Belgium, so much so that there's now a huge level of interest from Juventus. They want him for their under-23 program. I mean, first of all, that's incredible. Second of all, though, what advice would you give him? Would you say stay where you are or go into an age group system at Juventus?
Yeah, it's tough. Probably the lure of going to a big club like Juventus is hard to turn down. But yeah, you just look at the way Lib approaches his work. He's constantly looking to evolve and develop his game. I think he's become far more of a student of the game, and the steps he's taken from the A-League and to go to Belgium. And I've read some stuff where people don't really, or they've made comments where they don't really understand the level over there. Belgium is a top league, and the quality of players, and you only need to watch a few games to recognise the speed and the pace of the game there. So he's constantly learning, learning from his mistakes. I even read something the other day and speaking to him as well, where he's aware that he wants to improve certain areas of his game and probably his final ball, his delivery from wide areas when he gets forward. But he's a player that's obviously a huge talent, has got a big future. And so it's a tough one, like I said at the beginning, when you've got a club like Juve already, signalling some interest. For me, I think I look at the way he is developing his game in Belgium at the moment. I think the ability to play at that level, and we're talking not an age group level, but full senior pro football, I think at least for another season or two will be very good before he kicks on. But that said, ultimately it's up to him, and he may choose to go to a club like Juve if they do come in for him. May spend a couple of months in the 23s and get called up to the first team. You just don't know how football works. It's a strange old game. Yeah,
well, you would know better than me. Hey, you've played at that top level before. I haven't. When you look at Libby Cacace's development over the last few years, how surprised are you by how, I don't know, the trajectory of his improvement has been remarkable, hasn't it? Did you see that in him from a young age, the ability that would just skyrocket like this?
Look, I worked with him in the New Zealand under-17s, and there was no doubt that he had ability for a left-back, very attack-minded, good on the ball, quick and strong as well. But yeah, it's tough in terms of being able to know at that point in time with a 16, 17-year-old whether they're going to be capable of kicking on to a very high level of professional football. So for me, it's been unbelievable to see, and I think he's a great role model, as is somebody like Joe Bell, a great role model of a player that has made the most of their ability, is constantly looking to evolve and develop and improve. Wants to work hard on the training pitch, is critical of his own performances and looks at areas to develop. I think he's a great role model for any young player coming through.
Another young player doing wonderful things in Germany, Sarpreet Singh. He's been out on loan. Have you been in touch with him recently, Danny?
Yeah, look, I touched base with Sarpreet briefly last week, and so he was on loan at Nuremberg. That didn't quite work out for a number of reasons. I think the style of football they were playing, probably the level as well. So they're in the second tier of German football, and I think like a lot of second tiers, it's it's very results orientated. And so I think he learnt a lot there, but wasn't really getting the opportunities that he probably needs at this point in time in terms of playing regular minutes. So he's gone back to Bayern 2. He suffered a little setback when he first got back there, a little groin strain, but I see that he came off the bench again in the weekend. So good to see him back. But, again, it's another player that's evolving, developing, learning the whole time in Europe. And you've got to remember, these guys are young men. Just the fact that they're overseas, they're by themselves, they're having to evolve as human beings as well. It's impressive to see. And, a lot of players in the past, not just Kiwi players, but a lot of players in the past, when they've come across a little bit of adversity and things haven't quite gone their way, have looked to jump ship and come back home where we know it's nice and safe and you're surrounded by family. But the fact that these guys like Sarpreet, had a little bit of adversity at Nuremberg, straight back to Bayern and looking to continue his development.
I'm pretty sure it was Britney Spears who said whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or maybe that was another artist from the late 90s, early noughties, I'm not sure. But look, on Sarpreet Singh, the thing that really almost shocked me out of my skin when I first saw him playing over in Germany, and then when he was playing with the All Whites at the end of 2019, was the physical development that had taken place within him. When he was playing with the Wellington Phoenix, he was a really slight guy, almost like a stiff breeze would knock him over. But he's obviously done a lot of work on his physique as well, and that's held him in good stead, Danny.
Oh, 100%. And I think if you're going to play in Europe and you're going to play week in and week out, that's a necessity in terms of how you evolve as a player. You need to be physically strong so that you don't come down with injuries every second game. But he worked incredibly hard, particularly over a big lockdown period that they had in Germany. I was seeing videos of him working with his personal trainer, and some of the work they were doing in terms of the S&C was quite an eye-opener. So he's really looked to evolve that part of his game. And I know that Bayern Munich in particular looked at him, and that's why they basically assigned a personal trainer with him to get him to evolve that side. So great to see. It's only going to stand them in good stead. We all know what a talent he is on the ball. But nowadays you've got to be the all-round player, and he's working towards that.
I've just remembered it was actually Kelly Clarkson. It was Kelly Clarkson with those lyrics, Danny. So sorry to put you wrong on the Britney Spears tip.
I was just about to download it on Spotify as well.
Well, don't bother, mate. Go to kellyclarkson.com or something like that. Hey, just finally, before we wrap up our All Whites chat, Chris Wood doing great things for Burnley, as he always does.
Yeah, look, I watched him this morning against a very good Leicester side. He was excellent. So he had a couple of weeks out with a slight strain, a slight injury. But to see him play this morning, and the work actually he was doing off the ball, was immense. He was super strong up front, was creating all sorts of havoc, and beyond me how he didn't score a couple of times. Schmeichel in goal for Leicester pulled off a couple of wonder saves against them. So, yeah, Woodsy looking super sharp. I know he's in a good mental space. Whilst Burnley aren't scoring, truckloads of goals this season, he's still looking a genuine threat. And fingers crossed it's looking that way, but fingers crossed that, they maintain their place in the EPL, because to have a New Zealand player and somebody playing every single week like he does, one of the first names on the team sheet, is, I think, great for young players to look at and see their pathway, or potential pathway.
Just before we move on, and when we chat a bit ISPS Handa, men's Premiership, and a little bit about the Wellington Phoenix, interested to know, when you touch base with these All Whites abroad, how much of it these days is talking to them about how they're getting on with their club, their fitness and all that, versus how they're coping in a COVID society and dealing with lockdowns and things like that, and making sure that their state of mind is good?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, and that's why I try and touch base on a fairly regular basis. It's a real fine line, because obviously they're all overseas and doing their thing, and they're busy. They're getting contact from their own club coaches. So for me, it's just reaching out and just seeing how they're going. Particularly some of those younger players, as I touched on earlier, they're in a foreign country. Some of them for the very first time. They don't really have the support networks they probably did back here. So just reaching out every now and then and getting a sense for how they're coping, I think, is massive. And we've got some structures in place that, should they need some extra help, that they can reach out and get that as well.
Good to hear. All right, let's go closer to home. ISPS Handa Men's Premiership. It's almost all the way through the regular season. We've got one more game to go. Eastern Suburbs have a very vital game against Hawke's Bay to play, and I'm sure you'd be an interested spectator for that one, Danny, given your ties to Eastern Suburbs. Do you think that they can beat them and leapfrog Waitakere into the playoffs?
Oh, look, who knows? I think Hawke's Bay beat them here at Medill's Farm earlier in the season. So, first and foremost, let's hope that game goes ahead. It'd be a real tragedy if that didn't happen. And obviously, from Eastern Suburbs' perspective, they didn't get a chance to try and make that fourth spot. But look, I've really enjoyed the ISPS Handa this year. Really have. It's great to see a team like Hamilton Wanderers and a young coach, Cale Herbert, take them into the top four, and they've been really entertaining this year to watch. So, look, whether Eastern Suburbs make it or not, whether that game goes ahead, I'm still looking forward to the finals. It's going to be, I think, a pretty good showdown and a good way to finish the league structure as we know it.
Auckland City, obviously the team to beat. They only lost twice all season long, and I think you've got to go before Christmas when they suffered their last loss. What's it going to take to beat this Jose Figueira coach team?
Yeah, look, Auckland City are playing really well at the moment. I've watched them on a number of occasions this year, and it's great to see a real Kiwi flavour there at Auckland City, and the likes of Mario Illich have been playing very well, Logan Rogerson and co. And they've got goals in them. That's one thing about Auckland City. So I think first and foremost, if a team is going to have a chance of beating them, they're going to have to be defensively really structured. But it's going to be tough. A team that's only lost a couple of times all season, that's not by accident. They're well coached, well organised. They've got good players individually and play well as a team. But you look at a team like Team Wellington, and they've got players that can hurt opposition as well. The likes of Hamish Watson, Andy Bevan, good players, really, really good players. And then defensively, they're quite solid as well. But you get into the finals, and as I remember from my time there, anything can happen. So it's exciting, looking forward to it.
You mentioned Team Wellington there, and they had an opportunity to, I guess, put the shits up Auckland City a few weeks ago, and they ended up losing 3-1. Are you confident that they have the improvement in their game to beat them in a playoff scenario?
Yeah, well, look, anything can happen. I remember, a couple of seasons ago when I was coaching in the ISPS Handa, that Auckland City were red hot favourites, and Team Wellington went to Kiwitea and beat them in the semi-finals. So it just shows anything can happen. This ISPS Handa season, I think, has been closer than any that I can remember. It hasn't just been one or two teams that have run away with it. Sides, even Auckland City, have looked susceptible against teams that are further down the table at times. They look like they're playing really good football at the moment, and they are playing really good football at the moment. But you get into that final scenario, and when there's a huge amount of expectation on your shoulders, anything can happen. Knowing
that the competition is closer than it has been for a number of seasons, is it almost with sadness that you bid this competition goodbye? Because obviously the National League restructure takes place in only a couple of weeks' time. And so teams like Canterbury United and Auckland City will no longer be a part of this competition moving forward. Do you view it with some sadness?
Oh, look, to a degree, but personally, I think the National League had probably run its course. Remember, it's only 8 teams as well, so we're only getting to see eight squads, 8 groups of players show what they've got on a national front. Whereas I think the new structure now, you're going to one season. So before players were rolling on from winter to summer, back to winter, and not getting a break, I think was, in terms of player welfare, really quite a poor system. So the fact we've got one system now, the fact that it is club-based, and club-based now means that there's going to be pathways and opportunities for players inside a club. They can now look at a first team and actually see clear path into that. Whereas, unfortunately, with the franchises, they were just one team. So how you made, or as a young player, how you saw yourself getting into one of those teams was not easy. So there's a huge amount of benefits now with the new structure. And I think there's going to be a real focus, particularly around the under-20s and the under-20 rule, and a couple having to start each week. I think there's going to be a real focus on development. And I think long-term, that's going to be great for us, because we do have to, have a reality check and remind ourselves that this is an amateur league. It's not a professional league. Amateur league full of amateur clubs working with amateur players. So development really has to be the focus. We are a development league.
Danny, before I let you go, and thanks so much for being so generous with your time on the Kiwi Football Fix today, let's talk about the Wellington Phoenix before I let you go. They managed to get their second win of the season the other night against Newcastle Jets, a goal to David Ball and a wonder strike from Ben Waine getting the job done. Are you confident in what you've seen so far that they can continue to progress in this competition? I mean, they're doing it tough with injuries and whatnot.
Yeah, look, I think people have to look back to last season when Ufuk Talay first took over, and what was it, the first 5 or 6 games they really struggled, and then slowly but surely almost righted the ship, and I can see that happening again this year. Look, it's tough when you lose a player like Stephen Taylor, and he was a real presence defensively, held a huge amount of mana within the team. Organised all those around him, and I think even opposition sides were a little bit scared of him. So to lose a player like that, I think has been very difficult for them, and it's been tough to replace. But just looking at Tim Payne over the last week or two, and whilst I know it's probably not a position he sees himself playing long term, I think his performance last weekend was outstanding. And I think hopefully now, you start to get a few players coming back from injury. I know De Veer's out for a very long time, but people like Clayton Lewis are really stepping up. It was great to see young Ben Waine score as well and put in a good shift and a good performance. I still see them making the playoffs. I think they'll go on a little bit of a run. I think teams will underestimate them, and I think they've got the quality and the camaraderie amongst that group, even though they're doing it tough, living in Australia and away from Wellington. But I think they've got all of those bits and pieces to make a good little run.
I'm really keen to get your thoughts, being a former defensive man yourself, on their defensive rejig, if you like, because you've pointed out no Stephen Taylor, all that experience and quality out the door overseas. Libby Cacace, the same thing. They lose De Veer, and they're shifting people around left, right and centre. Yes, Tim Payne, he's playing well in the heart of defence, but how happy are you with this rejig? And what else would you do with it?
Yeah, look, it's tough. It's so unlucky that the likes of De Veer, that he's out injured, and it looks like for the vast majority of the season, if not the entire season. So it's difficult. Whether the club look to try and bring somebody in on loan or in the next window, I don't know. But it is tough. I sort of feel for Ufi at the moment. He hasn't really been able to play a consistent back four there. James McGarry has had opportunities, came off the bench in the weekend. He was looking really good at the start of the season. Now, looking to get back to that form again. It's good to see Louis Fenton back, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough for them. I feel for them. But like I said, I still think that they've got enough there, enough quality, enough experience to actually be able to get them through. And just one thing I do want to mention is it's great to see Oli Sail getting opportunities, and I think the way he's been playing has been outstanding. So yeah, just very pleased for him.
Yeah, glad you mentioned him. Oli Sail versus Stefan Marinovic. Who's the better keeper?
Tough, very tough. And but I've got to keep my powder dry, as you know. But look, Stefan started against the Republic of Ireland when we put out the best 11 that we could at that point in time. But like I said, I think the way Ollie's playing at the moment and his ability to actually influence the build-up and how the team plays out has been really noticeable. But he's pulled off some unbelievable saves. But this is football. You get your opportunity and you've got to make the most of it. And I've got no doubt that Stefan will get another opportunity at some stage. And then obviously it's up to him to try and take that number one spot. But it's healthy. It's really healthy for the football club that they've got two very good keepers now that are vying for that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Danny, what is it, day 5 of lockdown here in Auckland? What's on the agenda for the rest of the day?
Yeah, well, you tell me. I'm starting to get a little bit bored. No, like I said, I watched Woodsy this morning, so I'll probably go on to Y Scout now and watch a few more games. One I do want to watch, and we haven't spoken about him, is Michael Val, who's obviously, we're talking about goalkeepers before, but he's been doing extremely well in Holland, in the second tier of Holland, and his team Almere City are up there challenging for promotion into the Eredivisie. So, yeah, I was planning to have a watch of some of his games today and just see how he's tracking along.
Awesome, mate. Well, enjoy that and enjoy the rest of lockdown with your family. Thanks so much again for joining us on the Kiwi Football Fix. And with all going well, maybe we will see some All Whites or Oli Whites fixtures in the very near future. Danny, cheers for your time, mate.
Good on you. Thanks, Goran.